Hi, Nat Doig here. Today's episode is a little different. It was originally released to Weird in the Wade's patrons over on Patreon in the spring of last year, 2024. I've re-edited it and there's a whole new added final section not heard anywhere else before to today's episode. Now, I've had to do this month because by the time that you're listening, I will have had abdominal surgery and should be well on the way to recovery. But it has meant that I've been recovering for a couple of weeks this month, and so needed to produce an episode that would not take me too long or too much work to do. Hopefully, in February, we'll be back to a slightly longer episode about a couple of women accused of witchcraft in the 17th century, just north of Bedford. And there's an associated ghost story which chilled my blood when I first read it. But for now, please enjoy the mystery of Pegnut Wood's creepy old bridge. Hello and welcome to Weird in the Wade, a podcast about all that's weird, wonderful and a little off kilter in the town of Biggleswade in Bedfordshire. Each episode, I'll tell you a tale of something strange and unique that has happened in this most English of market towns or its surrounding area. There's an older meaning to the word weird, which means to twist and turn. In Norse myth and in Anglo-Saxon times, this came to mean fate or destiny, all that was and is, and all that is yet to be. Whether it's tales of ghosts or flying saucer hoaxes, the big cat of Biggleswade, or the Potton poisoner, curious social history, or the Great Swan Mystery of 1935, we'll follow all the twists and turns and uncover fascinating stories that will speak to you today, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Weird in the Wade. It's the 20th of June 2022, the start of that long, hot summer that baked Britain and broke all the records for our hottest day. On the 20th of June, it was warm and sunny. I was going to visit my hairdresser in Potton, but to make the most of the beautiful morning, I decided to take a walk through Pegnut Wood. All I knew about the woodland at the time was that it ran around the edge of the John of Gaunt golf course, and a footpath through it linked the town of Potton to the village of Sutton. I didn't have time to walk to Sutton, but I planned to walk as far as I could and explore. As I entered the woods from Biggleswade Road, it wasn't the most promising start. There was a sewage treatment works on my left, shielded by tight dark trees, and from the golf course on the right I could hear braying laughter. But within a few minutes of passing the sewage treatment plant, the woods opened out onto the left with clearings of scrub, nettles and cow parsley. The golf course was bordered by an ancient-looking hedgerow, its branches twisted and gnarled with age. The hedge was dense and tall, so that glimpses onto the golf course were few and far between. The air was thick with the bustle of insects, butterflies, bees, and the birds were raucous. The dirt path I was on was a rich, foxy brown colour. It made for easy and pleasant walking until I turned a slight bend and realised there was a brook up ahead. I stopped in my tracks. Across the brook loomed a thicket of very different-looking trees. These trees were tall and skinny. But it was the whole scene of the bridge over the brook and the trees that stopped me in my tracks. The scene wasn't quite right. It was just too green, I thought at first. Impossibly green. The bridge, the shrubs, the trees, the ivy, all of it was hyper-real. Like a physical Instagram filter had been spliced over my eyes, or a spell had been cast over that bridge. I felt quite queasy looking through it because that's how it appeared, like I was looking through something, through water, a mirror, a screen, a lens of some kind distorting the light, a veil, maybe. It wasn't heat haze. I've checked, and the high on the 20th of June 2022 was only a pleasant 20 degrees Celsius or 68 Fahrenheit, and in the morning it would have been cooler still. As I puzzled over the scene in front of me, I was reminded of one of my nieces who, when she was little, refused to walk through some woods in Doncaster because to her it looked like a hologram or computer simulation. This is exactly what the bridge in Pegnut Wood looked like to me, a hologram. Maybe now I'd say it looked AI generated, uncanny valley, real, but wrong somehow. The bridge was just a simple wooden structure spanning the small Potton brook, like many small wooden bridges I've crossed before on countless walks, in countless woods, and along riversides. I took a photo. I recorded video. I wanted to see if my phone captured the weirdness. And it did. I paused before crossing the actual bridge, but in the end, I wanted to walk on further and find out what was over the bridge and deeper into the woods. It might sound daft, but I was nervous walking over that bridge. It was like walking through a shimmer, or what Stephen King calls a thinny, or thin place, in the Dark Tower novels. But nothing unusual happened, and I walked on for another 10 minutes or so, and the rest of the path was uneventful and just as pleasant as it had been before turning that bend and seeing the bridge. There were lots of butterflies, and everything felt very alive. On my way back, I hurried over the bridge, but the effect was not quite the same approaching it in the opposite direction, but I still didn't want to linger there. I then went on a ramble through some of the clearings, trying to work out a shortcut into Potton, but decided against it in the end. I didn't think much more about the bridge, or maybe I tried not to once I was out of the woods. An hour or so later, when I was with my hairdresser, it cropped up in conversation though. Over a cuppa, my hair in foils, I mentioned that I'd gone for a walk in Pegnut Wood. My hairdresser, Lauren, commented that it was handy having the wood on her doorstep. I'm not sure why, but I then said to Lauren, you know, there was this one really peculiar and odd bit of the woods. Oh my God, Nat, do you mean the bridge? She interjected. I was stunned. I dug out my photo and I showed Lauren the picture I'd taken. She confirmed that was exactly where she was thinking of. And the reason why was because her dog and her children hated walking over that bridge and being near to it. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Her dog would refuse the bridge, yet was happy to walk over other similar bridges. Then Lauren explained that she was not alone in finding that part of the wood creepy. A neighbour had lost track of time whilst out walking last winter and had to hurry home through the dusk. On that part of the wood, when she crossed the bridge, it was dark. She was so scared. Yet, like us, she couldn't exactly say why. Later, when I was at home, I posted the picture I took of the bridge on Facebook and explained my strange feeling when approaching it. One of my friends commented that it looked like the kind of bridge you'd cross, only to find yourself transported back to the 1940s. And I realised that she'd described exactly my feelings about the place. I didn't feel like it was haunted as such, but just that it was off, that it was strange and not completely grounded in reality. It felt like the kind of place you could get lost in time in, or emerge into a fairy kingdom from. But why? I was determined to find out why. There must be a natural explanation for it. I'd even take an unnatural explanation, anything that explained my reaction to the place. Pegnut Wood. So, first of all, the name, Pegnut Wood. It's a bit odd, isn't it, Pegnut? Well, it comes from Pegnut. If you live in the UK, you've probably seen Pegnut growing at the side of roads, in hedgerows, field edges and wood clearings. It's similar to cow parsley, wild carrot and ground elder. It has clusters of many white flowers on long stems forming an umbrella type shape. It's an important food source for hoverflies and soldier beetles. As kids, we used to dig up patches of it near my house because underneath the plant there's a root, not dissimilar to a carrot, but it looks and tastes like hazelnuts once you've cooked it. We called it rootin for some reason, and I don't think we ever cooked it. We just used to dig it up and pretend we were farmers. I have to say here that it is illegal to dig up wildflowers. I don't think it was back in the 1980s. Anne Pratt's 1863 book, Haunts of the Wildflowers, gives Pegnut alternate names of kippernut and ground chestnut. Pratt says that the country children can be seen in the meadows of England intently digging up the tubers of the flower, though she cautions against eating too many of them, saying that they can cause a sore throat and headache, which she finds ironic as in Elizabethan times they were used as a cure for coughs. She even quotes a line from The Tempest where Caliban says, "And with my long nails I will dig thee pignuts." Shakespeare showing his country roots, as his plays often do, and his knowledge of the wildflowers and their uses. I have a 1880s copy of Anne Pratt's The Haunts of Wildflowers, and it is a beautiful book. I believe pigs did used to forage for it during pannage, which was when pigs were allowed to roam the woods eating nuts, digging up roots and fungi. So Pegnut probably gets its name from pignut, and there was pignut growing there when I visited, but for whatever reason, probably Victorian sensibilities, the pig bit became peg to make it sound, I suppose, less rustic. My initial research into the history of the wood was disappointing though. The woodland, it turns out, is actually fairly recent, planted and managed for its timber. I could find no historical evidence of a Pegnut wood existing before the 1950s. It had once been part of the land owned by the Burgoyne family, who were lords of the manor of Sutton. Their house and grounds are now the golf course. At the opposite end of the golf course to the spooky bridge, as I was now calling it, was an odd mound said to be the motte of a Motte and Bailey castle belonging to John of Gaunt. So we're talking a 13th century castle. Although interesting, that wasn't much help to learning more about the woods. The oldest map I found dates from the 1880s and clearly shows the path that I walked on as the main public footpath from Sutton to Potton. The bridge is also clearly marked on the map as a footbridge. 19th century and early 20th century newspaper articles make it clear that this path and the bridge over Potton Brook were for public use and maintained by Lord Burgoyne as they crossed his land, though he sought repayment from the council for his maintenance of the bridge in 1919. It also shows that until the 1950s, Potton Brook opened out into a much wider stretch with a boathouse and even a waterfall. This was all in Burgoyne's gardens, now drained and greened for the golf course. I'd hazard a guess then that this path linking the ancient village of Sutton to the equally venerable town of Potton is extremely old, and there's likely been a bridge there for a very long time. Certainly, the articles about maintenance of the bridge also make this claim. And the land the footpath crossed was of mixed use. Some scattering of trees is indicated on the maps, but no formal wood. There are small holdings nearby, fields, and of course Lord Burgoyne's gardens. Paul's theory. This leads me to Paul Jameson, local author and friend of the podcast. He has a theory about the bridge. You see, when I interviewed him this time last year for the Potton Wood episode, I asked him if he'd ever been to Pegnut Wood and what he thought of it. You mentioned Pegnut Wood.
Yeah.
If I mentioned the spooky bridge, would you know which bridge I meant?
I know which bridge you meant. Is that the old one that's going up past the golf course?
Yeah.
Yes, I know which one. But they've replaced it, I think. It used to be an older bridge.
Really?
I saw your photo of it, and they've actually replaced the bridge. It used to be much older.
Are you one of the people that's also found that little stretch there a bit strange, or not at all?
I didn't like it. I didn't think of it as strange. I just didn't like that part of the walk. I walked from Sutton, where the medieval bridge is, over the fjord, which is absolutely gorgeous.
It is beautiful.
And I usually used to walk through Pegnut Wood straight back to Potton, but instead I turned left and went round where that bridge is, otherwise I would never have found it, and it was just that one bit of along the edge of the golf course where the bridge is that I didn't like. I don't know why. It just felt uncomfortable.
And it's not like Potton Wood, is it?
No.
It's not like the crash site at Potton Wood. It doesn't feel like that.
The crash site at Potton Wood feels close and like someone's watching you, but you don't feel threatened. You feel a bit strange and a bit am I imagining things? This is my mind playing tricks on me. Perhaps I'd better go home. That sort of feeling. But the Pegnut Wood one was quite an uncomfortable feeling. It sounds strange, but once I went over the bridge, I was so glad to get to the road the other side. Yeah,
it is really strange.
It was a relief to get away from it.
And after this conversation, he shared with me a theory he had about the ancient path and bridge and where it was leading. You see, directly opposite the entrance to the wood on Biggleswade Road is Galley Hill. It's not much of a hill, but in East Bedfordshire terms, it's definitely a hill. Now, it seems to be generally accepted that places known as Galley Hill or Galley Fields are in fact denoting a place where a gallows once stood. So it should be Gallows Hill or Gallow Fields. Galley Hill is now tree covered, but again, I believe this is a fairly recent woodland and not ancient. So at one time, Galley Hill would have been prominent, an open landmark on your entrance and exit to Potton. And Potton was a prosperous and important town for most of the medieval and early modern times. Sutton was the seat of John of Gaunt's family and also an important place during the medieval period. Paul's theory is that criminal trials would have been held at the old Sutton Castle and maybe prisoners jailed there. If found guilty of serious crimes, the criminal would be marched along that path from Sutton to Galley or Gallows Hill and hanged for all the town and neighbourhood to see. I like Paul's theory, and he could well be right, but to me, it doesn't answer why that one bit of the footpath over the brook feels odd when the rest of the path doesn't feel the same. But Paul was so affected by his walk from Sutton to Galley Hill and the history of the place, it inspired one of his novels. I've posted a link so you can find out more in the show description. A terrible hoax. Still determined to discover the secret of Pegnut Wood's spooky bridge, I went down the route of researching any ghost stories, crimes, scandals or history which mentioned Potton, Galley Hill or the Potton Brook and Bridge. And for a moment, I thought I'd found a possible, terrible and tragic reason for why the area might have such an eerie atmosphere because I found a string of newspaper articles from 1878 with the headlines, "Horrible Murder at Potton." The first article I found spoke of the murder happening in a wood on the outskirts of Potton. There were newspapers from all over the country reporting this. The first article appeared on the 31st of January and others appeared for the next couple of days. But then there was nothing. Before I tell you the nature of this horrible murder, I am going to reassure you that it appears that the report was a hoax. Yes, fake news of the 1870s. Why someone would start a hoax like this is beyond me, but this is what was reported to have happened. On the outskirts of Potton, in a wood, or in some reports they said a field near a wood, a young woman was brutally murdered and then decapitated. 3 men had been apprehended because a gamekeeper had witnessed the appalling crime. And somehow, during the terrible crime and its aftermath, a dog had managed to eat part of the murder victim's body. The newspaper reports are suitably appalled at the horrific nature of the crime, whilst languishing over every detail. But it appears once telegrams were sent for further information from Potton, none was forthcoming. The police and the lord of the manor, Burgoyne again, reassured the journalists that there had been no such horrific crime in or around Potton. In fact, some of the reports run the initial story with a telegram printed below it saying that this has been confirmed as a hoax. The conspiracy theorists might think there's no smoke without fire and wonder if some local cover-up has happened, but I think it is unlikely. Unless maybe it was Burgoyne's dog who ate the body part. He might have wanted to cover that bit up, but not a murder, surely. But on further digging, it seems that even Potton was a red herring as well. The initial report was as vague as to say that the murder took place between Cambridge and Hitchin, and Potton seemed like as good a place to pin the murder to as any of the other countless towns and villages between Cambridge and Hitchin. I don't think any murders took place near this bridge then, or at least I have found no evidence of anything like that. Though the question of why someone would start such a rumour really is quite baffling. Dirty old town. There is one other reoccurring scandal which plagued Potton between the 19th century right up into the 1970s, and that's the issue of muck. Sewage. You might remember me saying that I passed by the sewage treatment works when I entered the wood. Nowadays, they're very tastefully hidden from view by trees and fencing, but the smell cannot be masked so easily, though after a few minutes walking, the waft of sulphur is just a memory. But this was not always the case. Potton was known in the 19th century as being a town with a typhoid problem, and by the 1870s the authorities knew why Potton had a typhoid issue. On the 3rd of May 1871, Biggleswade Poor Law Union, who were in charge of sanitation at the time, published a lengthy report on the problems at Potton. At first they say that the town in general is clean and airy, and it has every reason to be a healthy place. But it currently isn't because of the state of certain areas of the town. It takes each problem area in turn cataloguing their issues. Here's just a short extract. Biggleswade End. This might have been named from its resemblance to the worst parts of that town. It consists of 2 courtyards, which are sufficiently large, but literally covered with filth. The drain is stopped up, and the slops, etc., are just thrown out in front of the houses and runs down towards the street. There is no well. Water has to be fetched from the public house, the Royal Oak. There is one privy, found overfull for nearly 30 people. The stench of the whole place is horrible. No wonder that there is always sickness there. Soon after this report, the sanitation of the town was moved from the responsibility of the Poor Union and to a sanitation board, and then eventually to the various councils over the years. But by the 1880s, the sewage plant at the entrance to Pegnut Wood has been built and appears on the Ordnance Survey maps with an engine room from 1890. At this point, there is no Pegnut Wood, but instead there is a sandpit and a public footpath over the grounds belonging to the Burgoynes. This land seems to be a mix of light woodland and fields with cattle in them, as I mentioned earlier. Now, we know that there were cattle because some fall sick in 1907 when Potton Brook, near to where the bridge is today, becomes contaminated. The sewage treatment plant is blamed for the contamination of the brook, something it doesn't exactly deny. Instead, it says that it released clean water into the brook, which should have washed away any sewage. This is all sounding rather familiar to anyone living in the UK right now, but let me remind you, this was 1907. Complaints about the sewage works continue throughout the early 20th century. In 1932, the newspapers report that Lady Burgoyne, who owns the land that both the sewage treatment plant is on and Galley Hill over the road, is refusing to sell any of the land to the council, who actually run the sewage plant. News articles about the land on Galley Hill continue right up into the 1970s. It appears that in the 1960s, Galley Hill is being used as a waste dump. In fact, one potential buyer of the land who wants to mine for minerals and sand there says he will not buy the land if the rumours are true that it is being contaminated by the sewage works dumping effluent there. In 1966, a crime of robbery is solved when a police officer confiscates a cesspool from a residence near Sandy, then takes the cesspool to Galley Hill where it is dumped and then searched. A handbag and a £5 note are discovered amongst the waste, which is linked to a robbery. So it seems at least part of Galley Hill was being used as a dumping ground for sewage up until the 1960s. In 1975, the land is up for sale again and adverts run for months offering the land for purchase. It seems as though no one really wants to buy it. It does seem rather macabre to think that in medieval times, those deemed the worst criminals in their town were hanged on Galley Hill. Then centuries later, it becomes a place where human waste is just dumped. It seems like the area is destined to be somewhere where we get rid of the people and things we don't want to deal with, the unmentionable things we want out of sight and gone. But it's never that easy, is it? Could this history of disease, death, and dirt, which blighted the pretty town of Potton, be an explanation for the eerie and uncanny atmosphere in the woods? Could there be an environmental explanation? My second visit. Here's my thoughts when I visited Potton Wood last year. It's Tuesday the 2nd of May. I'm in Pegnut Woods in Potton. You can hear in the background the drone of a very large lawnmower and the cry of a bird of prey. I think it's a red kite and it's flying directly overhead. And I don't have my camera with me, but I do have my sound recorder. I'm standing in a clearing just in front of the spooky bridge, and I am going to walk over the spooky bridge in a moment. The sound of the industrial lawnmower is coming from a nearby golf course. So this isn't a lonely spot at all, and I walked along here and I could see people out golfing in bright clothes, and someone was pushing a trolley full of, I don't know what the technical term is, a trolley full of golfing gear. And so yes, it's not a lonely spot, As well as the bird of prey, I've been able to hear lots of other birds singing. It's got a bit quieter now because the kite's flying overhead. I think it's a kite. I didn't get a good enough look, and the sound of it, I think it's a kite, but it could have been a buzzard. I will double check when I get home. But yeah, I'm going to walk over the spooky bridge and see what it's like today. It looks very different today to how it looked when I walked over it and approached it back in June last year. Everything was so green. You'll be able to see the photographs on the blog that accompanies this podcast. But yeah, I'm going to walk over the bridge. It's a lot less overgrown because it's May, not June. And yeah, that was me walking over the bridge. It is a funny part of the woods. You suddenly get into a bit where if you couldn't hear the lawnmower, you would feel like you were quite far away from the golf course. And the trees suddenly become very, very straight and very, very tall. I'm not sure what kind of trees they are actually. I will try and find out. And there's also a lot of evergreen. So on this side of the bridge, I can now see that there are lots and lots of trees that are evergreen, and there's lots of ivy on them. So when you get to June and you've got all the new leaves, all bright and green, and then you've got all the evergreen colour, it is really intense, which it isn't quite so much here today. There is something slightly odd about the group of trees that I'm now standing in front of, because they are very uniformly planted. They're clearly being planted fairly recently, in recent years. This isn't natural woodland, but there are bits of natural kind of woodland creeping in amongst the sort of uniform planting. So I'm thinking that's why it probably feels a bit strange when you approach. I'm really not sure. I'm going to walk along in a moment and record the birds that I can hear singing just a little bit away. But it is very strange that on one side of the bridge, as you approach, there are lots of birds singing. You get to the clearing where the kite was flying overhead, and suddenly it's very quiet, even when there isn't a kite there. And then you cross over the bridge, and there's a little bend that you turn around, and I'm not at that bend yet, but once you turn around that bend, suddenly the birds are all singing again. But it is just like a very quiet spot, which isn't as quiet today because of the lawnmower. So, yeah. Oh, there goes the kite again. As I mentioned, there are now trees planted in the area behind the bridge. Tall, skinny, uniform trees. They stand out against the natural rambling nature of the rest of the site. Birds don't seem to settle in them. Is the land they've been planted on land polluted by us humans? Or is it just that these trees have been planted for no reason other than for our use? They don't really belong in that space. Is that why the birds shun them and we feel spooked when we walk towards them? Bridges. I also had a chat with my friend about bridges in general. Tess reminded me that bridges play a prominent role in folk and fairy tales, from the billy goat's gruff hiding under their bridge to the ghost stories attached to the covered bridges of the United States. Bridges are a crossing, obviously, but they are crossing a boundary of some kind, most traditionally over water, but also over roads and railway tracks nowadays, and even vast expanses of sea. I'd rather cross a bridge than go through a tunnel, but I still often feel uncomfortable on large bridges, like the Forth Rail Bridge, for example. What is beneath a bridge is hidden from us when we cross. When it isn't hidden, like when crossing Tower Bridge in London where they have a glass floor, then it is even more disconcerting. I promise you, I have never experienced anything quite as strange as walking over the bridge while seeing cars and pedestrians and water moving below me. So, bridges cross boundaries. and states of matter and being. They can be helpful, but they can also lead you into the unknown. So I think we underestimate the power of bridges at our peril. I'd just like to play for you a few moments of the sounds of Pegnut Wood. At first, I'm walking over the bridge and standing in front of those tall, skinny trees, which I now know are poplar trees. They're a specific type of poplar tree grown because they grow quickly and can then be cut down and used for timber, I'm guessing in things like the paper industry. Then the clip moves on to me walking around the corner and away from the bridge. I just want you to listen to the difference in the sounds of the birds singing. It is not completely silent just over the bridge and on the bridge, but it certainly gets louder and more raucous with birdsong the further you move away from it. You'll also be able to hear the droning lawnmower in the background as well. The clip lasts about 1 minute. Sadly, I don't think I'll ever solve the mystery of Pegnut Wood's spooky bridge, but I will keep searching for answers. If you know anything about the area or if you've had your own experience there, please do let me know. The Potton Puma. Recently, I had another dive into the newspaper archives to see if I could find out anything else about Pegnut Wood and Potton Brook, and I came across a really peculiar story. I was surprised to learn that in the 1990s there were sightings of a big cat in the area, and these sightings were known locally as the Potton Puma or Potton Panther. Could this legend be at all connected to Pegnut Wood? Well, I had to investigate. In February 1994, Geoffrey Kingham of Potton contacted the local newspaper, the Biggleswade Chronicle, to say that he'd spotted a wildcat near to Judith Gardens in North Potton, which is very close to Potton Brook. But it is the other side of town to Pegnut Wood. Geoffrey said, "It's not a fox, nor a dog. It's got to be a puma, or another type of mountain lion like a lynx." Through February into March in 1994, there were 3 other sightings around Potton and Everton. Everton is a small village just north of Potton. One of the sightings was by a special constable, another by a couple, Ted and Anne, who both saw the unusual animal. Anne explained, "It was definitely black and it was working its way along the hedge in the field. It wasn't just a fleeting glance. We got a good look at it." Potton Police Constable Steve Saxon said that another sighting had been from a man not from the area who was fishing in Potton Brook, the same brook that runs through Pegnut Wood, and he reported seeing a large cat. PC Saxon reassured readers of the newspaper that he was taking the sightings seriously, and he didn't believe that the fisherman's claims were, and I quote, "a wind-up." because this gentleman had no prior knowledge of the Potton Puma stories. On March 25th, 1994, the Biggleswade Chronicle ran another article listing 2 further sightings in Potton and Gamlingay. The cat is described by one witness as being seen eating a rabbit, whilst another saw the creature near the sewage works at Pegnut Wood. The article links these sightings to ones from the 1960s near Chicksands, about 9 or 10 miles away southwest of Potton, with one man, a lorry driver, claiming to have seen the big cat at Chicksands twice in the past, whilst other residents speculated that it was in fact a ghost. Others told the newspaper of a legend that in the 1930s, 2 pumas, a breeding pair, escaped from a circus near Bedford, and these big cats, now spotted throughout the country, were their offspring. The police even laid out a baited trap full of offal and waited for 2 hours, but the cats didn't appear. News goes quiet for a few months until July and the approach of the summer holidays, when a mysterious photograph is sent to the Chronicle claiming to be of the puma. Unfortunately, the clarity of the black and white image on the scans is so poor, I can't make out anything other than grass in the image. It's at this point that eyewitnesses begin to say that the cat-like creature is around the size of a German Shepherd dog, and that it's no longer black. Recent sightings say that this big cat is tan in colour. Fast forward again to August 1997, 3 years after the initial sightings, and a new photograph emerges of what is clearly a German Shepherd dog, who has had his fur cropped extremely short all over his body, apart from a ruff of dark, thick fur around his neck. The fur on his tail has also been trimmed, apart from a tuft at the end, which makes it look like a lion's tail. This rather disconcerting image looks like a lion with a dog's face. And in fact, this dog is 13-year-old German Shepherd Ben. Now, his owners claim that every summer, due to Ben not enjoying the heat and getting a skin condition because of it, he has to have his fur trimmed to a very short crop. They believe Ben is responsible for the Potton Puma sightings, and I think he probably was the culprit for the sightings in the summer of 1994. At that point, the description of the cat changed. But the animal originally seen in February and March of 1994 is described as being black. Its size is not likened to that of a dog's, and certainly not a German Shepherd, and Ben's fur would have grown back by that time in the winter. So personally, I think that there may have been an unusual cat-like creature stalking Potton in the winter of 1994, but by the summer, Ben the German Shepherd was the cause of the later sightings and photographs. Non-native big cats being released into the wild has been in the news again in January 2025 due to someone irresponsibly releasing 4 lynx, a family group, into the Cairngorms in Scotland. The 4 lynx were fairly swiftly recaptured after humane traps and cameras were laid. Now, as I'm recording this on Saturday the 11th of January, one of the lynx that was recaptured has sadly died. So by the time that you're listening to this, towards the end of January, you'll probably know more about this situation than I do. And I really hope that they find the irresponsible people who have done this. Currently, there is speculation ranging from it being someone attempting very badly and illegally to rewild, to reintroduce lynx. They were native to the UK up until 1,000 years ago, and some people have campaigned for the reintroduction of lynx to the UK, along with wolves. There have been cases of beavers being released illegally into the wild as well. Other speculation is that someone who owned the lynx as pets just couldn't cope with them anymore and so released them into the wild. By the sounds of it, the second scenario might be nearer to the truth, as the lynx were found fairly near to the A9 road, and apparently there were straw and dead chickens left in a lay-by for them. The lynx also were described as being tame, or at least very used to humans. Whatever the reason for this happening, it is a tragedy for the poor lynx and the community involved. But does the fact that they were so easily discovered mean, though, that big cat sightings are less likely to be true? Because surely we'd have caught those animals as well. Well, I'm not sure. As I mentioned earlier, these lynx, although abandoned in the Cairngorms, were left close to a road, and they were tame, so didn't stray far. Also, there being 4 of them made it easier to actually see them. You know, there's 4 of them wandering around. If somebody says they see a big cat in the wood, people might not believe them. But if someone says they've seen 2 or even more, then it's taken more seriously because it's just so unusual. If sometime between the 1930s and 70s, big cats did escape from circuses or private collections, then they were likely to be less tame than these lynx. And importantly, those big cats in the past chose to escape rather than being dumped. But it is curious that in the 1990s, some people around Potton didn't believe that these were real cats. They believed people were seeing something, just not a real puma or a panther. What they thought was that it was a ghost of a large cat. Now, do some of these big cat sightings in the UK fill a gap which the decline of the big dog sightings created? As society became more sceptical about ghosts and folkloric dogs, did big cats, with their potential to have a rational explanation, step in as a more acceptable version of a millennia-long tradition of huge folkloric beasts prowling the British Isles? I'll leave you to decide, but I don't think it was the Potton puma lurking in those poplar trees that made me and others feel uncomfortable crossing that bridge. I am resigned to the fact that we may never know why people have that reaction at that part of the woods. Thank you for listening to Weird in the Wade. I'd like to say a huge welcome to everyone who has found the podcast through the Christmas Danny Robbins episode. You are very welcome. I have one more piece of news, which is that towards the end of February, a dramatised ghost walk is due to take place in Biggleswade, based on the stories I have told in this podcast. I have written the script, and our local Dramatic and Arts Society, BATS, will be performing the walk. Keep an eye on Weird in the Wade's social media and blog for more information about how you can attend and get your tickets. The blog also has photographs of the bridge in Pegnut Wood and further information for you to have a look at. Just visit weirdinthewade.blog. Weird in the Wade is researched, written, presented and produced by me, Nat Doig. Theme music is by Tess Savagir, and all additional music and sound effects are from Epidemic Sound.